Hey guys, and welcome back to our long overdue retrospective. My name's Alex and you're watching episode 8. Today we're going to delve into one of the few games I can dub as being art, in the truest sense of the word. I consider it to be the video game equivalent of Kurosawa's Throne of Blood or Aphex Twin's selected ambient works. Truly a masterpiece in the medium. Although it's not my favourite game, I certainly enjoy playing it again and again. But we're here for a critical review. So, without further ado, welcome back to Retrospective. This is Shadow of the Colossus, released initially in 2005. Video games get a bad rep from art critics because of their obviousness and lack of intelligent structure, at least from what I've seen around. Films and music are much more generally accepted as art. And if we look at games like Call of Duty, it's clear to see why many would consider video games as a throwaway medium. However, with all bad, there's good, and Shadow of the Colossus is definitely the good for 2005. Directed by Fumito Ueda, of which his famous titles haven't disappointed me in the slightest. Yes, I enjoyed The Last Guardian, sue me. Shadow of the Colossus creates a happy medium between fans of typical PS2 era titles and fans of higher forms of entertainment. It delivers on action, drama, and tense, rewarding moments, but also instills mystery and awe at the landscapes by very intentional set design, which I'll return to. The story of Shadow of the Colossus is deliberately left very bare bones. All we know is a man by the name of Wanda is seeking a far-off land to try and have his wish of bringing a girl back from the dead. When he reaches the land, he is greeted by a spirit, or god, who implies that it can grant his wish if he destroys 16 colossi scattered across the land, the purpose of which is unclear at present. So, with nothing more to do, we are forced to head out to the first Colossus. Suddenly, as we reach the first Colossus, the music changes and the camera pans upwards to reveal a gigantic creature, far taller than the player. Daunting at first, the beast walks around without noticing Wanda, but quickly becomes aware of his presence and the fight is on. Generally, this is how the bosses will go, with an exception of a few, which I'll mention in a minute. This contrast to the calm, musicless wilderness to a full-on fight with a giant juxtaposes feelings and heightens the battle. With the last strike, Wanda is transported back to the castle again, with a foreboding figure stood above him. As the game progresses, it becomes clear that these are the souls of the beings that have been slain. But why are they there? Why did that god tell us to destroy them? It's a mystery. Now, I'm about to spoil the ending, so please, if you haven't played it, skip to the timestamp I've linked in the description. You've been warned. 3, 2, 1. Okay. In the end, it's revealed that the Colossi were designed for a purpose, to house the demon known as Dormin, who has been using Wanda as a method of returning to the planet to wreak havoc once more. We've been tricked, and it's this plot twist that makes all of the players' efforts crumble to dust. They were being used and ultimately set to die, with the final, powerful moment of being dragged into a pool or something, further away from your goal of the girl. It really makes the player feel like they've failed, and that there's nothing more they can do but accept death. It's important to mention at this point that the player is given control. They're going to be sucked into the pool regardless, but they are allowed to struggle. This struggling gives the player one last moment of hope, although they know it is in vain. Presenting this as a non-interactive cutscene would have diminished the impact of the final moments of the character the player has been controlling for the last few hours. It makes they themselves feel like they failed. Not that the game is forcing them to fail. Once they have been sucked into the pool, however, the girl reawakens, so all is not lost. It's this bittersweetness that makes the ending of the game worthwhile. I like to say to people that thinking people's art usually has either a sad or bittersweet ending, because if you look at the evidence, films generally regarded as being artsy have bittersweet or sad endings, such as Tarkovsky's Stalker or Herzog's Strozek. So giving this game a bittersweet ending boosts its art rating, if there were such a thing. Quickly, the player will begin to notice there's nothing around. Like, literally nothing. No people, no anything, save for a few lizards and fruit we can collect. This is clearly designed to make the ancient and mysterious land feel unwelcoming and even a bit lonesome, and to focus the player on their goal, that of the Colossi. However, the developers made a point of auto-panning the camera around to different angles to bring out the best of the landscapes, emphasising their beauty. The game is about atmosphere, and riding on Agro, the horse, with nothing else to distract you, really lets you take in the environment. It's like going for a walk alone in the forest. You get a sense of being one with the world, and this is what the game is trying to replicate. I can see what the developers were trying to achieve here, and while it works for the atmosphere, visuals are another thing. Because of the PS2's hardware, there was only a certain amount of assets that could be rendered at one time without a frame rate dip. But with Shadow of the Colossus, there's not much on screen, which would have given the developers room to increase the number of environment assets, as games like Yakuza rendered far more in any given shot than this title. It could possibly be down to the limited amount of off-the-shelf PS2 assets, and obviously the limited storage allowed per asset for texture sizes, but the landscape is barren, and in a bad way visually. Great aesthetically, and it works, bad visually. However, this is not a massive knock, as it's not horrible by any means. I would have just thought that an intentionally empty landscape would look a little more visually impressive. However, the remake on the PS4, the footage you're seeing, does an amazing job at fixing these issues. Using Quixel's Megascans library, an already impressive set of assets by themselves, Japan Studio and Bluepoint really created a gorgeous look for the remake. The bosses. This is where the game is at. As mentioned, Shadow of the Colossus has the player fighting giant monsters with the goal of slaying all 16 of them for the prize of the resurrection of a girl. They are scattered around the land, and it's up to the player to discover each of them. However, they can hold the sword provided up into the air to reveal the general direction of the next boss, but not how to get there, forcing the player to navigate the environment, making the point of it more obvious, to create serene moments before the climactic battles. Each boss is unique. Some stand on 2 legs, some on 4, and I'm convinced this guy is a reference to the sandworms from Dune. All have different arenas, and all have varying degrees of puzzle elements, which gradually become harder over time. The puzzles included aren't the most mind-boggling: shoot the glowing spots, use the tunnels to trick the beast, etc. But on first playthrough they can present the player with something to think about, as, while they're easy, they're not immediately obvious. All the bosses have weak spots that the player is required to reach and attack to drain the health bar of the Colossus. They can either find the weak points by themselves, by climbing around, or by shining the sword on them to reveal them. Either way is fine, but I believe I went for the exploring by climbing on my first time. Some of the weak points can't be reached until certain actions have been performed, such as luring the third boss into whacking a stone circle, which causes its armour to break apart, allowing the player to move up the arm and onto the body. I think this is pretty good, but it might have been pretty cool to use this as an easy route for players that found the climbing too difficult, and have another solution for more daring players, which could create more replayability and also create some dynamic play for the time attack mode. Throughout the game, the player will encounter colossi that won't attack them. They'll simply fly through the air or walk about, and it's these bosses that really throw the motives of the player into question. These colossi aren't hurting anybody, so why should the player kill them? Purely for selfish reasons. It's a good change of pace from the norm of going about an objective just because it's the right thing to do. Maybe this isn't. Now, I've heard this, but I can't confirm if it's true, but it might explain why I got frustrated with my next point, the grip gauge. When I first played this game many years ago, I noticed that I was constantly falling off the Colossus. Almost every time I made it to the rune spot, I fell off and had to repeat ad nauseum. What I've heard is that the PAL version is a harder version of the game because the grip gauge depletes much faster than other versions, which, as I've said, might explain my frustration. However, I can't confirm this. All I know for sure is that the climbing isn't the most solid mechanic in the game, and considering it's kind of the main one, it's a shame it isn't on point. The music in Shadow of the Colossus plays a big role, because there's not really any dialogue, characters, or anything that music would have just served as a means to either fill gaps in speech or provoke emotions at certain characters' deaths, or something. The music in this title serves to intensify the moment. They range from adventurous songs that play as you're flying through the air or dangling on the arm of one of the beasts, to mysterious and unnerving ones that cause you to think about the scene in front of you. Some even express that the Colossi aren't even bothered about the player, and pairing this with the fact that they won't attack until attacked, this solidifies what I was saying about the intentional confusion of the defeat of each Colossus. It's worth mentioning that no music can be heard whilst travelling to the next boss. I believe this was intentional, as it allows players to reflect on either the coming battle or previous ones, as they may see the corpses of old foes, much like I imagine Wander would be doing at this point. It also allows them to take in the environment, which I've explained is an important feature of the game. The music is only really used where it's appropriate, rather than needed. In conclusion, I think that, as I mentioned at the start, video games can be art. It's clear to see that Shadow of the Colossus isn't focused on mindless violence or overdramatic stories. While it does have both violence and drama, it successfully weaves them together into a game that I believe to be an art game, similar to how there are art films, as I've said before. Stanley Kubrick made a film with less than 40 minutes of spoken dialogue. Ueda and Team Ico created a seemingly bare-bones game that's surprisingly deep if you're willing to look further into it. I've enjoyed this game for many years, and I'm glad to see that its appeal was long-lasting enough for HD re-releases and a remake. Though some might argue that Ueda's first big title, Ico, is a better example of an art game, I think that Shadow of the Colossus takes the cake in that regard, and this is why I'm awarding it an 8 out of 10 and an essential rating. I'm Alex, I hope you enjoyed this retrospective, and I'll catch you around. Hey, thanks for watching, I'm glad you enjoyed it. If you want to see more, check out episode 7. This is on Earthbound, one of the 2 games I award a 10 out of 10 to. It's a wild, zany exploration into some of the most weird subjects. Definitely one to check out.